What if the greatest fairy tale of the modern age was already ending, and nobody saw it coming until it was too late? That's the question we're opening with tonight. Because Meghan Markle, once celebrated as the woman who broke barriers and captured a prince's heart, now stands at 4 to 4 facing whispers of a tragedy so deep, so personal, it feels almost unbearable. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind. Let's peel back the layers of glittering smiles, Vogue covers, and royal weddings to expose the cracks that were there all along. Think about this. How does someone go from walking down the aisle at St. George's Chapel, cheered by millions across the globe, to being the subject of hushed conversations about separation, regret, and a marriage that may already be beyond saving? How does a woman once seen as a global icon of empowerment become the poster child for whispered pity? You might already be forming an answer in your mind. But stay with me, because what's coming will twist those assumptions upside down. Let's set the stage. It was May 2018. The world was transfixed. Meghan, radiant in her Givenchy gown, walked into history. Millions watched live. Hundreds of millions replayed clips. This was more than a wedding. It was a global event. A biracial American actress marrying into one of the most rigid monarchies in existence. It was a story of modern love conquering centuries of tradition. Or so we were told. But even as the trumpets rang and the carriages rolled, whispers circulated. Some insiders swore they saw tension on William's face. Others pointed to Camilla's smirk, or Kate's stiffness, or the absence of certain family members. The tabloids ran glossy photos, but behind the curtain, storm clouds were already forming. Now, here's the chilling thought. Was the tragedy of Meghan Markle always written into this script? Was the fairy tale just a carefully staged performance masking incompatibilities too great to overcome? Fast forward. 4 years later, the couple has fled the palace. They are in California, surrounded by palm trees, Netflix cameras, and the promise of freedom. But the glow has dimmed. The weight of expectations, broken promises, and a relentless media machine has started crushing everything in its path, including their love story. And now, at 44, Meghan is staring at a reality no Hollywood producer could script. The crumbling of a marriage that was once sold as invincible. Let me ask you, can love survive when the world itself becomes your battlefield? Or does the battlefield eventually consume the love, leaving only regret behind? Here's the irony. Meghan once symbolized triumph, a woman who seemed to have it all. But isn't it true that the higher you climb, the lonelier the fall? That's the haunting part. Because while Meghan is photographed smiling at charity galas, insiders whisper about empty car rides home, about silence in their Montecito mansion, about Harry's eyes betraying a sadness he can't disguise. And you have to wonder, when the cameras switch off, when the crowds disappear, what's left? Imagine Meghan at night, scrolling headlines, reading comments, feeling the shift in tone. Once adored, now mocked. Once defended, now ridiculed. At 44, that has to sting. And Weiss, what if the very man she gave everything up for is beginning to slip away too? But let's not stop at emotion. Let's talk about power. From the start, Meghan understood the value of titles. Duchess of Sussex wasn't just a formality. It was leverage. In Hollywood meetings, in branding negotiations, in philanthropy pitches. Yet the royals saw it differently. To them, titles were duty, not branding tools. And therein lay the clash. The titles became both shield and weapon, promise and curse. Do you see the contradiction? The very thing that elevated Meghan also shackled her. And when King Charles hinted at stripping those titles, Meghan's panic wasn't just about status, it was about survival. Because if the Duchess crown slipped, what was left? Meghan, the actress whose show was cancelled years ago? Meghan, the influencer fighting for attention in an oversaturated market? Meghan, the estranged daughter, sister, and now, perhaps, estranged wife? It's not just a question of reputation. It's a question of identity. And then there's Harry. Once the cheeky prince adored for his charm and military service, Harry now appears different, worn down, haunted by choices. Some say he looks trapped. Others say he looks like a man still trying to convince himself he made the right decision. What do you see when you look at him now? Do you see love? Or do you see exhaustion? Here's where it gets even darker. People close to the couple whisper that Harry sometimes speaks of his old life, his family, his brother, his duties, not with anger, but with longing. And Meghan hears this. She sees the look in his eyes when royal traditions appear on the news. She feels the distance. And what could be more heartbreaking than realizing the man you thought you saved is secretly wishing he'd stayed behind? Now, here's the kicker. This isn't just about love and regret. This is about isolation. Because as Hollywood doors quietly close on Meghan, as friendships evaporate, as deals underperform, she's left with fewer allies than ever before. Even those who once championed her are stepping back, wary of being caught in the crossfire of controversy. And yet, Meghan can't stop. She pushes harder. More projects, more interviews, more appearances. But with each step, the public seems less forgiving, less enchanted, and more critical. So, ask yourself, what happens when the world stops believing in your story? What happens when the fairytale collapses and all that's left is reality? Think about the irony. Meghan Markle once seemed unstoppable. She outmaneuvered critics. She married a prince. She fled the palace. She secured multi-million-dollar deals. But now, whispers of separation hang over her. And the cruelest part, at 44, instead of celebrating triumph, she's facing her greatest tragedy yet. And maybe, just maybe, the signs were always there. The cold shoulders at royal events, the nervous laughter at interviews, the mismatched goals between husband and wife. The fairy tale wasn't built on a foundation of trust and shared dreams. It was built on rebellion, escape, and the promise of freedom. But freedom, it turns out, isn't free. So here we are, Meghan Markle at 44, once the fairy tale bride, now the whispered tragedy. The world is watching, some with sympathy, some with scorn, but all asking the same burning question. Is this the end? Because what comes next isn't just about Meghan's career or Harry's regrets. It's about whether love itself can survive the weight of crowns, cameras, and crushing expectations. And here's where the story turns. Because while Meghan thought she'd secured her future, the truth was waiting for her all along, in a place she never expected, and from the person she least suspected. That's where the unraveling begins. That's where we begin. The beginning of the fairy tale. Or at least, the version of it the public was allowed to see. Because behind the horse-drawn carriage, the tiara, and the glowing headlines, there were cracks, hairline fractures in a glass slipper that would eventually shatter. And if you listen closely to the voices who were there at the start, they'll tell you, the tragedy we're talking about now at 44 didn't appear overnight. The seeds were planted on day one. So let's rewind. Let's go back to when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry first met. It was a blind date. That's what we were told. A mutual friend. Some say designer Misha Nonu. Others whisper it was Marcus Anderson. Set them up. The prince and the actress. The rebellious royal and the self-made star. It sounds like a Netflix pitch, doesn't it? Almost too good to be true. But here's the thing. What happens when two people from such different worlds collide under the pressure of global scrutiny? One born into a family where every move is scripted by centuries of tradition. The other, an American actress hustling through auditions, trying to carve out her own story. Was it love at first sight? Maybe. Was it destiny? Or was it the spark of a tragedy that would take years to play out? Think about it. Harry admitted in interviews that he was captivated by Meghan the moment he saw her. Meghan described him as kind, genuine, almost disarmingly normal despite the crown-shaped shadow hanging over him. But even in those early days, whispers say Meghan had questions. What would life look like with a man who didn't just belong to himself? Could she ever be more than the supporting character in his royal drama? Now picture this. It's 2016. Meghan's career is steady but not extraordinary. Suits is still running, but she's no Hollywood A-lister. She's dabbling in lifestyle blogging, charity appearances, and fashion partnerships. She's hungry for more. Harry, on the other hand, is stuck between worlds. Too royal to be ordinary, too rebellious to fully fit into palace life. He's searching for someone who understands him, who sees the man, not the title. Do you see the irony forming here? Harry wanted escape, Meghan wanted elevation. She wanted someone who didn't care about the crown. She wanted a crown-shaped stage to amplify her voice. Can those two opposing needs ever truly align? Their romance ignited quickly. Remember when news first broke of Harry dating Meghan? The media frenzy was instant. Headlines screamed, "Harry's American actress girlfriend." Tabloids picked apart everything. Her past relationships, her family drama, even her ethnicity. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't just Meghan. She was a symbol of progress, of change, of controversy. And that's the first contradiction. Meghan had dreamed of fame. But when true global fame arrived, it wasn't on her terms. It was on theirs, the tabloids, the royals, the public. The fairy tale had already slipped out of her control. And then came the proposal. Harry claimed he got down on one knee over a roast chicken dinner. Casual, intimate, romantic. At least, that's how the story was sold to us. But inside his whisper there was more at play. Pressure, timing. Harry, desperate to prove his love in the face of mounting press attacks. Meghan, aware that saying yes didn't just mean marrying a man. It meant stepping into the most scrutinized family in the world. Ask yourself, how many people could handle that pressure? Would you? Would you walk into a centuries-old institution knowing half the country didn't want you there? Knowing your every move would be dissected, criticized, compared? And then, the wedding. St. George's Chapel. A global audience of nearly 2 billion. Meghan, radiant in her simple white gown, walking down the aisle partway alone. That moment was historic, powerful, symbolic. She wasn't just marrying Harry. She was making a statement. A woman of color, divorced, American, stepping into an institution defined by whiteness, aristocracy, and rigidity. The applause was thunderous. The narrative was unstoppable. This was the fairy tale of the century. But behind the applause, there were murmurs. Guests noticed the coldness between William and Harry. Others whispered that Camilla looked amused rather than moved. And some pointed out Meghan's own family drama, the absence of her father, the bitter feud with her half-siblings, casting a shadow on the celebration. The photos were flawless. But perfection is often the best disguise for chaos. Now let's get personal. The honeymoon stage didn't last long. Insiders reveal Meghan struggled with the transition almost immediately. From the outside, she had everything: titles, jewels, a prince by her side. But inside palace walls, she felt caged. Rules about clothing, rules about speeches, rules about who she could befriend, what she could post, how she should sit, smile, even breathe. Imagine being told your nail polish is inappropriate. Imagine being scolded for closing a car door on your own. These sound trivial, right? But strung together, they paint a picture of suffocation. And Meghan, who had lived independently for years, began to suffocate. Harry saw it. He tried to protect her. He issued that unprecedented statement early on, blasting the press for racism and harassment. But even then, did you catch it? It wasn't just Meghan under attack. It was Harry, too, being forced into the role of defender, rescuer, protector. That dynamic, once romantic, can become suffocating in its own way. Because what happens when the rescuer realizes he can't save the person he loves? And here's where it gets even more haunting. The public narrative was all smiles and glamour. But behind closed doors, Meghan was questioning everything. She asked friends, could she survive this? Was the price of love too high? Could she keep her identity intact? And some friends, in hushed tones, admitted later they weren't sure she could. That's the real beginning of the tragedy. Because from the very start, the fairy tale demanded sacrifices neither Meghan nor Harry fully understood. Sacrifices that would slowly chip away at their love, their stability, and eventually, their marriage. So yes, the world cheered the royal wedding. But if you listen closely, you can hear the cracks echoing underneath the cheers. And those cracks, they were about to spread. Because the palace walls don't just keep secrets in. They also close in tighter and tighter until breathing feels impossible. And that's exactly what Meghan was about to discover. That's where we are now. Meghan Markle, the newly minted Duchess of Sussex, glowing with titles and tiaras, suddenly realizing that every step she takes is being watched. Every breath she exhales is judged. Every choice she makes is either applauded or weaponized. Welcome to the palace, where walls don't just keep outsiders out, they trap insiders within. Let's picture this. The wedding is over. The carriages have rolled away. The global applause is still ringing in the air. But inside Kensington Palace, Meghan is handed the first of many briefings. Rules, expectations, protocols, and they aren't suggestions. They are laws, enforced not by police but by centuries of tradition, by courtiers who see themselves as gatekeepers of the monarchy. Nail polish must be neutral. Hemlines must be appropriate. Speeches must be pre-approved. Social media, forget it. Spontaneity, not allowed. Friendships, scrutinized. Every move, every smile, every frown, measured against the invisible rulebook of royalty. And Meghan, an independent woman who had built a life for herself, traveled the world, worked on her own terms, is suddenly suffocating. Here's a haunting thought. Meghan wasn't just adjusting to marriage. She was adjusting to becoming property. Think about that. Property of the institution. Property of the crown. Even Harry, her husband, knew this feeling. He had been raised inside it. But for Meghan, it was a shock unlike anything she could have imagined. And then came the whispers. Meghan made Kate cry. No, Kate made Meghan cry. The story changed depending on who was leaking, who was spinning, who was protecting their side. But what never changed was the impact. Meghan was suddenly painted as difficult, demanding, divisive. The tabloids devoured it. The palace, silent, let it grow. Ask yourself, what does silence do in a marriage? When your partner can't, or won't, defend you publicly, even if privately they swear they love you. Now imagine Meghan walking through palace halls, staff avoiding eye contact, whispers trailing behind her. Imagine her picking up newspapers and seeing her face twisted into villainy. Imagine her realizing that every time she tried to defend herself, she was told, "That's not how we do things here." And Harry? He was caught in the middle. He saw the toll it took on her. He tried to protect her. Yes, but he was also bound by loyalty to his family. Can you picture the arguments? Meghan, desperate for him to speak louder, to fight harder. Harry, torn, insisting he was trying, but never enough to silence the storm. This is where the walls closed in. The irony is brutal. The very palace Meghan thought would give her protection, status, and power, instead left her exposed. The press savaged her daily. Trolls filled her inboxes with venom. Even palace staff, according to reports, nicknamed her Duchess difficult. Whether it was fair or not, it stuck. And here's the kicker. Once the palace machine labels you, it's nearly impossible to escape. Ask Diana. Ask Fergie. The institution thrives on scapegoats, and Meghan was the newest one. So what do you do when the home you were promised becomes the battlefield of your worst nightmares? Let's go deeper. Meghan, heavily pregnant with Archie, admitted later that she felt suicidal during this time. Think about that. A woman, newly married, carrying a child, living in castles, confessing that the pain was so deep, the walls so tight, she could barely breathe. That's not fairy tale. That's tragedy unfolding in real time. And Harry? Haunted by memories of his mother, he knew history was repeating itself. He saw Meghan suffering. He remembered Diana crying out for help, ignored by the same institution. And Harry swore he wouldn't let that happen again. But promises made in whispers can't silence headlines screamed in bold. Do you see the contradiction? Meghan wanted freedom, but she married into duty. Harry wanted love to heal him, but love only pulled him deeper into conflict. Together, they tried to rewrite the rules. But the palace doesn't bend easily, and every attempt to assert independence backfired. They spent holidays apart from the family. They dodged photo ops. They refused to play by the rota rules of the press. And every rebellion made the walls press tighter. The monarchy doesn't forgive. It punishes, quietly, ruthlessly. So Meghan and Harry, once the golden couple, became outsiders within their own home. Now here's where the tragedy sharpens. Meghan confided in friends that she felt unwelcome at family gatherings. That when she spoke, her words landed flat. That when she entered the room, eyes darted, shoulders stiffened. Imagine that isolation. Imagine being celebrated by millions outside the gates, but inside those walls, feeling utterly alone. And Harry? He was changing too. Those who knew him said he became angrier, more paranoid, more protective. His laughter, once his trademark, dimmed. His warmth, clouded by frustration. And the man who had once been the fun, carefree prince became the fierce, guarded husband. It sounds noble, doesn't it? A husband protecting his wife. But here's the cruel twist. The more he defended Meghan, the further he drifted from his family. And that wedge, once small, grew wider with every headline, every confrontation, every silence from the palace. So the question becomes, when love demands you sever ties with the only family you've ever known, how long can love itself survive? This was Meghan's reality. At 37, stepping into the role of Duchess. By 4 whispers of tragedy. But it didn't begin with Netflix contracts, Hollywood gossip, or Montecito mansions. It began here, in these palace walls, closing tighter and tighter until there was only one way out. And that way out would change everything. Because when the pressure grew unbearable, Meghan and Harry made a decision so shocking, so unprecedented, it sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The fairy tale was about to fracture. And the escape plan? It came with consequences neither of them could control. What happens when the walls close in so tight that escape feels like the only option left? That's the moment Meghan and Harry reached. And their decision to leave wasn't just a quiet family matter. It was a declaration of war. Against tradition. Against protocol. Against the very monarchy itself. This is the story of their exit to America. An escape that promised freedom but delivered a new kind of prison. Let's rewind to January 2020. The world was still buzzing from Christmas festivities. Royal watchers expected the usual annual traditions. Sandringham, the Queen's speeches, the family photos. But instead, a bombshell dropped. Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back from royal duties. They weren't just resigning from jobs. They were walking away from centuries of responsibility, privilege, and expectation. Do you remember where you were when you heard it? Headlines everywhere screamed Megxit. Commentators compared it to abdications, rebellions, even betrayals. This wasn't just a family matter. It was a constitutional crisis wrapped in tabloid headlines. But ask yourself, was this really Meghan's idea? Or Harry's? Or both? Feeding each other's fears until escape seemed inevitable? Think about the psychology here. Meghan, feeling isolated and attacked, saw leaving as survival. For her, the palace walls weren't protection. They were suffocation. And Harry, haunted by his mother's fate, felt history repeating itself. He couldn't stand by. Not again. Not with Meghan. Not with Archie. So together, they crafted a plan. They'd split time between the UK and North America. They'd step back from duties but keep titles. They'd earn their own money while maintaining royal connections. Sounds simple, right? But nothing about royalty is simple. Behind the scenes, the palace was blindsided. The Queen, Charles, William, all caught off guard. Negotiations turned tense. Questions flew. Who would pay for their security? Would they still represent the crown? Could they even use this Sussex royal brand they'd been building? And here's where tragedy met irony. Meghan and Harry thought leaving would give them freedom. But the monarchy, wounded by what they saw as betrayal, tightened the screws. Stripped patronages, cut financial support, forced them to abandon the royal brand. What was meant to be a clean break became a messy war. Now picture Meghan and Harry landing in Canada. For a brief moment, it seemed idyllic. Secluded houses, ocean views, privacy. Meghan was smiling again, photographed hiking with Archie strapped to her chest. Harry looked relaxed, finally out of the shadow of palaces and protocols. But peace didn't last. Paparazzi found them. Reporters camped outside. Security concerns mounted. And whispers grew louder. The couple couldn't stay in limbo. They needed money. They needed deals. They needed a new stage. And that stage? Hollywood. So came the leap to California. Montecito mansions, Beverly Hills meetings, streaming contracts. For Meghan, it was familiar ground. For Harry, it was alien. Imagine him, a man raised on polo fields and military bases, suddenly thrust into the world of agents, producers, and influencers. Meghan could navigate it. Harry, he was a prince out of water, but together, they sold a vision. Deals with Netflix, Spotify, book contracts, speaking tours. For a moment, it seemed like the gamble had paid off. They weren't just ex-royals, they were global power players. Or were they? Here's where the cracks widened. Freedom came with costs. The couple had to produce content, projects, performances, but critics said they underdelivered. Netflix questioned their output. Spotify canceled contracts. Hollywood A-listers distanced themselves. And Meghan and Harry, who once commanded attention simply by existing, now had to fight to stay relevant. And relevance is a dangerous drug. Too much, and you burn out. Too little, and you dissipate. So Meghan doubled down. More interviews, more appearances, more projects teased. But every move attracted backlash. The public, once enchanted, grew cynical. Attention-seeking, some called her ungrateful, others sneered. And Harry? He seemed torn. Was this the freedom he'd imagined when he walked away from duty? Or just another gilded cage, this time built not of palace walls but of Hollywood contracts? Ask yourself this. What's more dangerous, being trapped by tradition or being trapped by your own ambition? Because for Meghan and Harry, the exit to America didn't end their story. It opened a new chapter of contradictions. Financial independence, yes, but also financial pressure. Freedom from the monarchy, yes, but also exile from family. A new platform, yes, but also new scrutiny, harsher than ever. The tragedy of Meghan Markle deepened here. At 44, instead of living the dream of freedom, she found herself battling for survival again. This time not against courtiers in the palace, but against critics in boardrooms and headlines. And then came the most heartbreaking part. Even in California, even surrounded by luxury, the whispers of regret began. Friends close to the couple said Harry missed home, missed traditions, missed his brother, missed the sense of belonging only the monarchy could give him. Meghan noticed. She felt it. She feared it. And what could be more painful than realizing the man you crossed oceans for, sacrificed everything for, still longed for the life you helped him escape? That's the cruel twist. Escape gave them freedom, but freedom brought its own chains. So here's the cliffhanger. The exit to America wasn't the happy ending Meghan dreamed of. It was the beginning of a new tragedy. Because Hollywood, unlike the palace, doesn't just whisper disapproval. It shouts. It cancels. It erases. And Meghan was about to learn that the land she thought would save her could just as easily destroy her. Because the Netflix mirage, the promise of $100 million and global relevance, was about to unravel before her eyes. And when it did, the cracks in her marriage would become impossible to ignore. What happens when the deal of a lifetime becomes the burden of a lifetime? That's where we are now. Meghan and Harry, freshly escaped from the palace, settling into California with a $100 million Netflix contract that promised freedom, power, and a global stage. It was supposed to be their redemption arc, their chance to prove to the world that they could stand tall outside the monarchy, tell their own story, and control the narrative for once. But here's the question. Did that deal save them? Or did it slowly suffocate them? Let's start at the beginning. The Netflix partnership was unveiled as groundbreaking. The couple's production company, Archewell Productions, would create documentaries, films, children's programming, even scripted content. The world expected an empire. Netflix expected results. And Meghan and Harry? They expected validation. Remember how the palace stripped them of the Sussex royal brand? Netflix was their counterpunch. 100 million reasons to prove they didn't need the monarchy. They could build their own dynasty. But the cracks showed quickly. Think about the promise versus the reality. In the announcement, Meghan spoke of storytelling that informs but also gives hope. Harry promised to shine a light on underrepresented voices, lofty goals, ambitious dreams. And yet, where was the content? Months passed, then years, and very little materialized. What did emerge? A glossy docuseries about themselves. Hours of Harry and Meghan recounting palace grievances, family betrayals, and personal struggles. It pulled in viewers at first, yes, but it also deepened the perception that Meghan and Harry weren't global changemakers. They were reality TV stars trading on family drama. And here's the irony. The deal meant to elevate them reduced them instead. Now let's talk Hollywood. You know how unforgiving it can be. In Hollywood, you're only as good as your last hit. And Meghan and Harry had one chance to prove themselves. But insiders began whispering about creative clashes. Deadlines missed. Projects shelved. Executives losing patience. The animated children's series Meghan championed? Cancelled. Other pitches? Reportedly dismissed. Netflix had invested millions, but the returns looked slim. So ask yourself, what happens when you sign a $100 million deal and the company begins to regret it? Pressure builds. Expectations turn into ultimatums. And every meeting becomes a test of your worth. And then came the backlash. Critics said the docuseries was narcissistic. Journalists accused the couple of hypocrisy, demanding privacy one moment, then selling personal stories the next. Even some of their supporters admitted they were disappointed. Imagine Meghan reading those reviews. Imagine Harry watching headlines twist their truth into mockery. Imagine the arguments at home, late at night. Meghan insisting the world just didn't understand them. Harry wondering if they had made a mistake. This is where the tragedy deepens. Because freedom wasn't supposed to look like this. Let's look at Meghan specifically. She thought Hollywood would welcome her back with open arms. After all, she was no longer just an actress. She was a duchess. But Hollywood isn't sentimental. Hollywood doesn't care about tiaras. It cares about power, money, and bankable talent. And here's the brutal truth. Meghan wasn't bankable anymore. Not as an actress. Not as a producer. Not as a storyteller. Her greatest value was her connection to the royals, the very family she had walked away from. Do you see the contradiction? The crown she shared was the crown Hollywood still wanted. Without it, she was just another ambitious player in a cutthroat industry. And Harry? This world wasn't built for him. Hollywood thrives on networking, charm, and endless self-promotion. Harry wasn't raised for that. He was raised in military barracks and royal estates, not boardrooms and backlots. At first, he followed Meghan's lead. But soon, friends said, he looked out of place. Awkward. Lost. A prince in exile, fumbling through a world that didn't need him. And Meghan saw it. She knew he didn't fit. She knew he missed England. She knew every time he stumbled through an LA event, he wished he was somewhere else. How do you carry a marriage when your partner feels like a stranger in the world you've chosen? Now here's where it gets truly tragic. The Netflix mirage didn't just affect their careers. It affected their relationship. Because when money is tied to marriage, when contracts are tied to love, the lines blur. Were they partners in life? Or partners in business? Were they building a home? Or building a brand? And the more the brand faltered, the more the marriage cracked. Arguments about projects became arguments about priorities. Arguments about public image became arguments about private choices. And every missed deadline, every critical headline, every cancelled pitch added weight to a marriage already buckling under the strain. Do you feel the irony yet? Meghan and Harry left the monarchy to escape duty, pressure, and expectation. But in Hollywood, they found a new monarchy. Executives instead of courtiers. Ratings instead of protocol. Deals instead of duties. The gilded cage had followed them across the Atlantic. So here's the cliffhanger. The Netflix deal was supposed to be their salvation. Instead, it became their curse. And behind closed doors, as projects stalled and executives whispered, Meghan began to feel the panic rising. Because if Hollywood rejected her, if the industry turned its back, then what was left? And why still? Harry began to question whether leaving the palace had been the right choice at all. And when a husband starts to wonder if he made the wrong decision, what happens to the marriage? That question would explode into the open when Harry's private regrets could no longer be hidden. What if the man who gave up everything for love begins to wonder if love was worth the price? That's where we are now. Harry, once the cheeky prince adored for his warmth and his smile, is no longer the same man. Hollywood didn't change him. Meghan didn't change him. The weight of his choices changed him. And those choices, leaving the palace, cutting ties with his family, trading duty for freedom, began to haunt him. This chapter is about Harry's private regrets, the kind of thoughts he doesn't voice in interviews, the ones hidden behind careful smiles and scripted speeches, the thoughts that, when whispered at home, can break a marriage from the inside out. Let's rewind for a moment. Harry was always the rebel. From wild teenage parties to wearing that infamous Nazi costume, he was branded the spare who didn't fit the mold. The press mocked him, the palace scolded him, but the public adored him for his humanity. He wasn't stiff like his father. He wasn't polished like his brother. He was real. And then, the army. Harry thrived there. For the first time, he wasn't Prince Harry. He was just Harry, serving in Afghanistan, earning respect, finding purpose. Those years shaped him. They grounded him. They gave him something Meghan never could: belonging. Now imagine the torment when he left it all behind. In California, Harry had the mansions, the contracts, the sunshine. But what he didn't have was that sense of purpose. No uniforms, no deployments, no brother-in-arms camaraderie, no traditions grounding him. Instead, his days were filled with Zoom calls, pitch meetings, and Hollywood dinner parties. Ask yourself, can a man who once fought on the front lines really be content sipping green juices in Montecito? Insiders began noticing. Harry looked restless, fidgety, at times irritable. And when conversations turned to his family, William, Charles, the Queen, he grew distant, even defensive. Regret, after all, rarely announces itself. It hides in the pauses, the sighs, the silences. Now let's talk about William. For decades, Harry and William were inseparable, brothers bound not just by blood, but by trauma. Losing Diana, enduring Charles' scandals, surviving the suffocating spotlight. They were each other's anchor. And yet, when Meghan entered the picture, that bond frayed. William questioned the speed of the relationship. Harry bristled. Words were exchanged. Wounds deepened. And when Harry chose Meghan over the monarchy, William saw it as betrayal. But here's the truth. Harry missed him. Missed the laughter. Missed the sense of us against the world. And Meghan knew it. She saw the flicker in his eyes when old family photos appeared in the press. She heard the hesitation in his voice when Archie asked about uncles and cousins. She felt the distance every time Harry grew quiet after yet another story about William surfaced. The cruel irony? Harry left to protect Meghan. He thought exile would save her. But in exile, he lost the very things that once protected him. His brother, his military, his traditions, his country. And when a man loses his anchors, what happens? He drifts. And drifting men often find themselves looking backward more than forward. Now imagine the tension at home. Meghan, ambitious, determined, insisting they must keep pushing forward. More projects, more appearances, more deals. Harry, weary, uncertain, longing for the simplicity of army life or even the strange comfort of palace routines. Two visions, pulling in opposite directions. That's not partnership. That's collision. And those collisions, insiders whisper, erupted behind closed doors. Harry snapping about headlines. Meghan accusing him of weakness. Arguments that started about business turning into fights about family. And in the middle of it all, regret, sitting silently at the table, eating away at them both. Do you feel the contradiction? Harry thought he was freeing himself. Instead, he shackled himself to a world he didn't understand. Meghan thought she had gained a partner in her Hollywood ambitions. Instead, she had a husband who longed for something she couldn't give him. The more Harry looked backward, the more Meghan pushed forward. And the gap widened. Let's pause for a moment. Think about the sacrifices you've made for love. The friendships you've lost, the opportunities you've passed up. Now imagine making those sacrifices not just privately, but publicly. Imagine millions of people debating your choices daily. Imagine realizing, years later, that maybe you made the wrong call. That's Harry's torment. He can't go back. He can't undo the past. He can't reclaim what was lost. But he also can't stop wondering, what if I had stayed? And Meghan, she knows he wonders. And that knowledge is poison. Here's where it gets even darker. Friends say Harry sometimes talks about his army days with a longing that borders on grief. He speaks about Sandhurst, about patrols in Afghanistan, about flying helicopters. He remembers the camaraderie, the purpose, the respect. Things that no Hollywood producer, no Montecito neighbor, no Netflix executive can give him. And Meghan, hearing this, realizes the brutal truth. She can't compete with that. She can't be the army. She can't be the brother he misses. She can't be the Queen's grandson. She can only be Meghan. And sometimes, that's not enough. So here's the cliffhanger. Harry's private regrets aren't just about his past. They are about his present, about his marriage, about the life he chose. And the more he wonders, the more the marriage trembles. Because what happens when the man who gave up everything for you quietly wishes, in his heart, that he hadn't? That unspoken truth hung in the air of their Montecito mansion. And Meghan, already isolated, already battling rejection in Hollywood, began to feel the loneliness grow sharper. And that loneliness would soon consume her, dragging her into a spiral of doubt and despair. Because what's worse than being hated by the world? Being unwanted by the one person you sacrificed everything for. What happens when you leave a palace filled with critics only to find yourself standing alone in a city that pretends to embrace you, but doesn't? That's where Meghan Markle found herself. The escape to America was supposed to bring her freedom, love, and validation. Instead, it brought her something far more cruel: loneliness. Hollywood, the world she once thought would be her natural home, turned out to be colder than the palace hall she fled. Picture this. Meghan, once an actress hustling for auditions, returning to Los Angeles not as a struggling performer but as a duchess. She expected doors to swing wide open. Invitations from A-list circles. Phone calls from producers. Collaborations with brands. After all, hadn't she married into royalty? Wasn't her name on every headline? But Hollywood has a short memory and a sharper edge. It doesn't care about tiaras. It doesn't worship titles. It worships box office numbers, ratings, and relevance. And Meghan's relevance was fading. Here's the contradiction. When Meghan first left the royal family, she was everywhere. Talk shows, magazines, streaming platforms. But quickly, the tone shifted. Invitations slowed. Brands grew cautious. Celebrities whispered. Meghan wasn't an insider. She wasn't a proven Hollywood heavyweight. She was an outsider trying to repurpose a crown she no longer wore. And that's the heartbreak. The very city she thought would save her left her stranded. Let's dive into the social scene. At first, Meghan and Harry were spotted at glitzy events, charity galas, red carpets, private dinners. But insiders began noting something odd. They weren't blending into Hollywood royalty. They were orbiting it. Close enough to be photographed, far enough to remain outsiders. A-listers who once smiled for cameras beside Meghan kept their distance in private. Some feared backlash from the palace. Others simply didn't see her as valuable company. After all, Hollywood thrives on alliances that benefit careers. And Meghan's star was dimming. Now imagine Meghan, scrolling through photos of parties she wasn't invited to, friends she thought she had drifting away, allies choosing silence. Imagine her hearing whispers of being too demanding, too self-absorbed, too high maintenance. The same labels the palace had once pinned on her were now echoing in Hollywood's corridors. She hadn't escaped the narrative. She had carried it with her. And Harry, he wasn't much help here. This was Meghan's world, not his. She tried to pull him into meetings, premieres, and networking circles. But Harry, awkward and out of place, struggled. He missed his old friends, his old life. He didn't understand the subtle codes of Hollywood social climbing. He was a prince among producers, and in L.A., that meant nothing. So Meghan went alone. And the lonelier she felt in public, the lonelier she became at home. Now here's where it turns darker. When people stop inviting you, you start pushing harder. Meghan doubled down. More charity projects, more speaking engagements, more attempts to rebrand herself as a global humanitarian. But every move was scrutinized. Critics accused her of attention-seeking. Audiences tuned out, and deals began to dry up. Loneliness doesn't just happen in silence. It happens in noise. Imagine Meghan walking onto a stage to polite applause, only to return home to empty silence. Imagine her curating Instagram-worthy moments that never quite went viral. Imagine her crafting speeches that inspired no headlines. That's a loneliness sharper than isolation. It's invisibility in plain sight. But here's the cruelest irony. Meghan thought America would free her from judgment. Yet the judgment in Hollywood was harsher than the monarchy ever was. At least in the palace, rules were clear. But in LA, the rules shifted daily. One wrong word, one wrong outfit, one wrong handshake, and the industry dismissed you. Meghan wasn't dismissed loudly. She was dismissed quietly. The phone stopped ringing. The offers slowed. The buzz faded. And in that silence, loneliness grew. And at home, reports suggest Meghan and Harry's arguments deepened during this period. Meghan, frustrated by rejection. Harry, frustrated by her obsession with winning Hollywood. The fairy-tale mansion in Montecito became less a sanctuary and more a gilded cage of its own. Staff came and went. Friends came and went. And Meghan, once the center of global fascination, sat alone wondering, what went wrong? Have you ever felt that? Being in a room full of people, but feeling utterly invisible. That was Meghan's reality at 44. Now think about her family. Her father, estranged. Her half-siblings, hostile. Her mother, supportive but distant from the spotlight. Meghan didn't have the family safety net others leaned on. She couldn't call her father. She couldn't confide in her siblings. And the family she married into. They were across the ocean, many unwilling to even pick up the phone. Loneliness isn't just about who's missing. It's about realizing there's no one left to call. Here's the question. When your public life is crumbling and your private life feels fragile, where do you turn? Meghan turned inward. She became more controlling, some say, more insistent, more desperate to prove she could still matter. But the harder she tried, the lonelier she became. Hollywood saw the effort, and Hollywood despises effort that looks desperate. It's a vicious cycle. The lonelier Meghan grew, the harder she pushed. The harder she pushed, the more people pulled away. And the more they pulled away, the lonelier she grew. And here's the cliffhanger. Meghan's loneliness in Hollywood wasn't just her tragedy. It became Harry's burden too. Because every rejection, every failed project, every lost friend fueled new fights behind closed doors. Arguments that cut deeper, words that couldn't be unsaid. And one night, one unforgettable night, those fights reached a breaking point. So let's rewind. Let's go back to when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry first met. It was a blind date. That's what we were told. A mutual friend. Some say designer Misha Nonu. Others whisper it was Marcus Anderson. Set them up. The prince and the actress. The rebellious royal and the self-made star. It sounds like a Netflix pitch, doesn't it? Almost too good to be true. But here's the thing. What happens when two people from such different worlds collide under the pressure of global scrutiny? One born into a family where every move is scripted by centuries of tradition. The other, an American actress hustling through auditions, trying to carve out her own story. Was it love at first sight? Maybe. Was it destiny? Or was it the spark of a tragedy that would take years to play out? Think about it. Harry admitted in interviews that he was captivated by Meghan the moment he saw her. Meghan described him as kind, genuine, almost disarmingly normal despite the crown-shaped shadow hanging over him. But even in those early days, whispers say Meghan had questions. What would life look like with a man who didn't just belong to himself? Could she ever be more than the supporting character in his royal drama? Now picture this. It's 2016. Meghan's career is steady but not extraordinary. Suits is still running, but she's no Hollywood A-lister. She's dabbling in lifestyle blogging, charity appearances, and fashion partnerships. She's hungry for more. Harry, on the other hand, is stuck between worlds. Too royal to be ordinary, too rebellious to fully fit into palace life. He's searching for someone who understands him, who sees the man, not the title. Do you see the irony forming here? Harry wanted escape. Meghan wanted elevation. He wanted someone who didn't care about the crown. She wanted a crown-shaped stage to amplify her voice. Can those two opposing needs ever truly align? Their romance ignited quickly. Remember when news first broke of Harry dating Meghan? The media frenzy was instant. Headlines screamed, Harry's American actress girlfriend. Tabloids picked apart everything. Her past relationships, her family drama, even her ethnicity. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't just Meghan. She was a symbol of progress, of change, of controversy. And that's the first contradiction. Meghan had dreamed of fame. But when true global fame arrived, it wasn't on her terms. It was on theirs, the tabloids, the royals, the public. The fairy tale had already slipped out of her control. And then came the proposal. Harry claimed he got down on one knee over a roast chicken dinner. Casual, intimate, romantic. At least, that's how the story was sold to us. But inside his whisper there was more at play. Pressure, timing. Harry, desperate to prove his love in the face of mounting press attacks. Meghan, aware that saying yes didn't just mean marrying a man. It meant stepping into the most scrutinized family in the world. Ask yourself, how many people could handle that pressure? Would you? Would you walk into a centuries-old institution knowing half the country didn't want you there? Knowing your every move would be dissected, criticized, compared? And then, the wedding. St. George's Chapel. A global audience of nearly 2 billion. Meghan, radiant in her simple white gown, walking down the aisle partway alone. That moment was historic, powerful, symbolic. She wasn't just marrying Harry. She was making a statement. A woman of color, divorced, American, stepping into an institution defined by whiteness, aristocracy, and rigidity. The applause was thunderous. The narrative was unstoppable. This was the fairy tale of the century. But behind the applause, there were murmurs. Guests noticed the coldness between William and Harry. Others whispered that Camilla looked amused rather than moved. And some pointed out Meghan's own family drama, the absence of her father, the bitter feud with her half-siblings, casting a shadow on the celebration. The photos were flawless. But perfection is often the best disguise for chaos. Now let's get personal. The honeymoon stage didn't last long. Insiders reveal Meghan struggled with the transition almost immediately. From the outside, she had everything: titles, jewels, a prince by her side. But inside palace walls, she felt caged. Rules about clothing, rules about speeches, rules about who she could befriend, what she could post, how she should sit, smile, even breathe. Imagine being told your nail polish is inappropriate. Imagine being scolded for closing a car door on your own. These sound trivial, right? But strung together, they paint a picture of suffocation. And Meghan, who had lived independently for years, began to suffocate. Harry saw it. He tried to protect her. He issued that unprecedented statement early on, blasting the press for racism and harassment. But even then, did you catch it? It wasn't just Meghan under attack. It was Harry, too, being forced into the role of defender, rescuer, protector. That dynamic, once romantic, can become suffocating in its own way. Because what happens when the rescuer realizes he can't save the person he loves? And here's where it gets even more haunting. The public narrative was all smiles and glamour. But behind closed doors, Meghan was questioning everything. She asked friends, could she survive this? Was the price of love too high? Could she keep her identity intact? And some friends, in hushed tones, admitted later they weren't sure she could. That's the real beginning of the tragedy. Because from the very start, the fairy tale demanded sacrifices neither Meghan nor Harry fully understood. Sacrifices that would slowly chip away at their love, their stability, and eventually, their marriage. So yes, the world cheered the royal wedding. But if you listen closely, you can hear the cracks echoing underneath the cheers. And those cracks, they were about to spread. Because the palace walls don't just keep secrets in. They also close in tighter and tighter until breathing feels impossible. And that's exactly what Meghan was about to discover. That's where we are now. Meghan Markle, the newly minted Duchess of Sussex, glowing with titles and tiaras, suddenly realizing that every step she takes is being watched. Every breath she exhales is judged. Every choice she makes is either applauded or weaponized. Welcome to the palace, where walls don't just keep outsiders out, They trap insiders within. Let's picture this. The wedding is over. The carriages have rolled away. The global applause is still ringing in the air. But inside Kensington Palace, Meghan is handed the first of many briefings. Rules, expectations, protocols, and they aren't suggestions. They are laws, enforced not by police but by centuries of tradition, by courtiers who see themselves as gatekeepers of the monarchy. Nail polish must be neutral. Hemlines must be appropriate. Speeches must be pre-approved. Social media, forget it. Spontaneity, not allowed. Friendships, scrutinized. Every move, every smile, every frown, measured against the invisible rulebook of royalty. And Meghan, an independent woman who had built a life for herself, traveled the world, worked on her own terms, is suddenly suffocating. Here's a haunting thought. Meghan wasn't just adjusting to marriage. She was adjusting to becoming property. Think about that. Property of the institution. Property of the crown. Even Harry, her husband, knew this feeling.